NLC, welcome to church. City Lights, we're on for a fun afternoon this Saturday starting at 2:30 p.m. right here. A reminder that you'll need to bring 200 bob for the hangout. Make sure you're checking all the details on the City Lights WhatsApp group and Instagram. Register and we'll see you on Saturday. The church office will be closed for our staff break on the 16th to the 21st of August. If you need to make any appointments, please make sure you do so this week. Finally, a few reminders as you register for church this week. First, please note that children and ignites who are going straight to Kids House do not need to be registered. Also, if you're making a booking for several people, please be sure to fill a different registration for each person. Lastly, we want to encourage you to ensure that you attend the service that you register for so that we make the best use of the capacity we have. And now, church, it's time to give. We're doing that by M-Pesa on paybill number 652652. And in the account section, indicate your giving number if you have one, as well as what you're giving towards. Let's read together from Luke 6:38 in the Message translation. Give away your life. You'll find life given back. But not merely given back with bonus and blessing. Giving, not getting, is the way. Generosity begets generosity. God bless you as you give church. And here's Pastor Don now with today's message.
Today, let's turn our hearts to the Old Testament, the book of Micah. Micah chapter 6, verses 3 through 5. Then we will jump over to 1 Samuel chapter 11, verse 14. Micah chapter 6, verse 3. O my people, what have I done to you? What have I done to make you tired of me? Answer me. For I brought you out of Egypt and redeemed you from slavery. I sent Moses, Aaron, and Miriam to help you. Don't you remember, my people, how King Balak of Moab tried to have you cursed, and how Balaam, son of Beor, blessed you instead? And remember your journey from Acacia Grove to Gilgal, when I, the Lord, did everything I could to teach you about my faithfulness. 1 Samuel chapter 11, verse 14, Samuel said to the people, come on, let's go to Gilgal and renew the kingship there. Micah, one of the minor prophets. They're called minor prophets because of the length, or due to the length of their books. There were 12 minor prophets. But their ministry and their prophetic word was just as significant as the 4 major prophets. Micah lived and prophesied in Judah during the reigns of King Jotham, King Ahaz, and King Hezekiah around the year 720 BC. Micah also prophesied through the crucial years that were surrounding the takeover of Israel by the Assyrian Empire, which he also predicted in Micah chapter 1. In Micah's time, the people of both Judah, the southern kingdom, and Israel, the northern kingdom, had abandoned the ways of God. Jerusalem and Samaria, the capitals of the 2 Jewish kingdoms, were centers of idol worship and bad living. The rich oppressed the poor, and the laws of the Torah, the laws of Moses, were totally rejected. Micah addressed both Israel and Judah's injustice toward the lowly through underhanded business dealings, robbery, mistreatment of women and children, and a government that lived in luxury off of the hard work of its nation's people. This servant of the Lord, this man Micah, he made an impassioned plea for the people to return to God. And most significantly, as we read in our text, Micah conveyed the voice of God directly to the nation. The Lord himself pleading in verse 3 of Micah 6, which we read, "What have I done to make you tired of me?" When no one answered, God reminded them of his good works on their behalf in demonstration of his loving and his gracious care for them. Jehovah then concludes by commanding them to remember their journey from Acacia Grove to Gilgal. Now, Acacia Grove was the last camp that they made in the wilderness on the east side of the Jordan, while Gilgal was the first place that they camped in the promised land in Canaan. Most interestingly, in verse 5, God wants them to specifically remember their journey into Gilgal when I, the Lord, did everything I could to teach you about my faithfulness. Now let's go back 340 years earlier, and let's hear the prophet Samuel's passionate call to Israel. Come on, come on. Let's go to Gilgal and renew the kingship there. The passion of the prophet Samuel, is found in these words, come on, come on. The word come means to walk, referring specifically to the pathways or the behavior of one's life. To walk, referring specifically to the pathways, the behavior of one's life. Israel was commanded to walk in the ways and the principles of the Lord, their behavior displaying to the nations and to the people around them that they belonged to God. Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 9 says, if you obey the commands of the Lord your God and walk in his ways, the Lord will establish you as his holy people, as he solemnly promised to do. Then, verse 10, then all the nations of the world will see that you are a people claimed by the Lord, and they will stand in awe of you. You see, Samuel understood that at Gilgal, the nation of Israel, under Joshua's leadership, renewed their covenant with God. Samuel understood that it was at Gilgal, it was there that they reinstated Jehovah's kingship and began walking once again in his commands and principles. Today, part 5 of renewing a kingdom principled life. Renewing a kingdom principled life. From what transpired with God's people at Gilgal, we indeed are learning valuable lessons in being renewed to live a principled lifestyle as an individual in God's kingdom. Today we're going to turn our hearts to Joshua chapter 5, and we're going to read from verse 10. Joshua chapter 5, verse 10, the Israelites celebrated Passover while they were camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho. Verse 11, the day after Passover, the people ate food that grew in that land. They ate bread without yeast and roasted grain. The next morning, the manna from heaven stopped coming. This happened the first day after the people ate the food that grew in the land of Canaan. From that time on, the Israelites did not get the manna from heaven. In verse 12, something is repeated that I want us to take note of. The next morning, the manna from heaven stopped coming. Then at the end of the verse, it says, from that time on, the Israelites did not get the manna from heaven. Heaven is emphasized here to reiterate that manna was God's miraculous provision, faithfully supplied 6 times a week to the hungry Israelites, all during their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. As suddenly as it had begun, it ended, demonstrating that its provision wasn't a matter of chance. That provision was of divine providence. But there's also something else that we must take note of that is so important. The manna from heaven did not stop until the day after they ate the provision of the promised land at Gilgal. Now let's recall the final words that God spoke to Israel from our text, Micah chapter 6 and verse 5. God said, remember your journey from Acacia Grove to Gilgal, when I, the Lord, did everything I could to teach you about my faithfulness. With the manna stopping at Gilgal, God was teaching his people to remember that they can trust him, to be a wonderful timekeeper. They can trust him to be a supernatural provider right to the very end. I want to repeat that. With the manna stopping at Gilgal, there's a lesson here. With the manna stopping at Gilgal, God was teaching his people of his faithfulness, wanting his people to remember that they can trust him to be a wonderful timekeeper and a supernatural provider right to the very end. So to be renewed in a kingdom-principled life, number 4, return to a place of trust in God's unending faithfulness. Return to a place of trust in God's unending faithfulness. Today I hold before you a truth that will keep you, a truth that will hold you when the river is in flood stage, when the river seems impassable. Listen up. No matter what is going on in your life right now, whether it's stress, health issues, finances that have you in a bind, wishing you had never married, or desperately wanting to get married, a child or children who have placed an ache in your soul, or the death of someone you love, whatever pain you are in today, God's steadfast love for you will never, ever end. His mercies are new every morning. There is a dawn that is coming after the night, for our God is faithful. I pray today that God, by his Spirit, will renew in each of us a trust in his loving kindness, a trust in his faithfulness. Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 9 says, know that Yahweh your God is God, the faithful God who keeps his gracious covenant loyalty for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commands. 1,000 generations. I did some study on 1,000 generations. And 1,000 generations is equivalent to eternal generations. It's forever. How faithful is our God? Listen to this scripture from Numbers chapter 11, verse 5. The people of Israel said, we ate fish in Egypt and we got it free. To say nothing of the cucumbers and melons, the leeks and onions and garlic. But nothing tastes good out here. All we get is manna, manna, manna. Listen up. How faithful is God? When God's people despised God's provision, God did not discontinue sending the manna from heaven. Nor did God cease to supply it, even when the unbelieving generation turned away at Kadesh Barnea and began to wander in the wilderness. Think of it, church. He continued to feed an unbelieving generation until they grew and entered the promised land. 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 13 says, but even if we are faithless, he will still be full of faith, for he never wavers in his faithfulness to us. Finally, when God brought the children of Israel into Canaan, guess what? They entered the promised land just at the commencement of harvest season. What a faithful God we serve. Joshua 5:11 from the King James Version says, they did eat of the old corn of the land and parched corn on the selfsame day. The old corn of the land and parched corn on the self-same day. Scholars tell us that the old corn was found in the storehouses of the fleeing residents, and the parched corn was corn that was roasted after being found in their abandoned fields. What a faithful God we serve. You can put your trust and your confidence in that God. Oh, let's return to a place of trust in God's unending faithfulness. I want to close with this quote. Listen up. God is always faithful to answer. Sometimes his answer is a much desired yes. Sometimes his answer is a merciful no. Sometimes his answer is a faith-building not yet. And sometimes, when an answer cannot be found, his answer is simply, trust me. You can trust our faithful God. His faithfulness is unending from generation to generation, even to 1,000 generations.